For those of you who may not be aware, the Vietnam War Veterans Recognition Act of 2017 established the 29th of March in perpetuity as a national day to recognize the previously unsung patriotism of our Vietnam veterans. The proclamation states, throughout this commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War and every March 29 thereafter, we will honor all those who answered our nation's call to duty. We vow to never again confuse personal disapproval of war with prejudice against those who honorably wear the uniform of our armed forces. With conviction, our nation pledges our enduring respect, our continuing care, and our everlasting commitment to all Vietnam veterans. Events such as tonight's panel show the same commitment to honoring our Vietnam veterans, and I'm proud to be here tonight. Distinguished veterans, it is an honor to have the opportunity to meet you today and to hear your stories, and thank you again for your example that you set for the youth of Marshfield. Thank you all.
It is an honor for me to stand before you today to speak to high school students who will shape the future, and to veterans who gave of themselves to our country, and to community members who remind us of the power of unity and learning from the past. I want to thank Timmy and Ryan for their efforts in putting this night together. After we had done something similar last year with the lessons of World War II, both came to me and thought this would be a great idea to do again, but from the perspective of the Vietnam War. Their vision, organization, and product is a testament to their work and their desire to give something back to the community. Once again, please give them a round of applause. We gather here not just to remember the Vietnam War, but to learn from it and to listen to the stories and the history of the efforts of those who gave the greatest sacrifice any citizen can give, the defense of their nation. Because history is more than a record of what happened. It is a guide for learning what must be remembered and improved. When the Founding Fathers said in the preamble that we seek a more perfect union, this is what they meant. In class, we talk about the Vietnam War as a geopolitical Cold War conflict and an example of containment of Soviet expansion. But we also view the war from the perspective of what Secretary of State Robert McNamara said in his 1995 memoir of a set of foreign policy decisions that were, and I quote, wrong, terribly wrong, and we owe it to future generations to explain why it happened. This is a healthy exercise for both those who lived through the times and for those who were too young or not even born to know what happened. In history class, it's very proper to know why this happened, and even to tell us if there were failures. The Vietnam War was one of the longest and most divisive conflicts in American history. It took the lives of over 58,000 Americans and 1.3 million Vietnamese. It split the nation in many ways that are still evident today. It left behind deep scars and a lasting impact, not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts, minds, and bodies of a generation. Like all history, we can draw valuable lessons that should guide future military, political, and diplomatic decisions. As Vietnam was more than a war, it should also be a lesson in leadership, a lesson in decision-making, a lesson in the consequences of global conflict, a lesson in sacrifices and actions that Americans make for the nation, a lesson in wisdom, judgment, and restraint, and a lesson in the future of our nation. These lessons are so important in today's America when we wrestle with foreign policy and government programs that call into question the vision of this great nation going forward. Because in the words George Santayana that most have heard, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, we talk about this. This is true when he wrote this in 1905, and it is true today. However, I'm reminded of another quote by this philosopher, which said, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." For this nation, the war that concluded 50 years ago this April still lives. We should never forget the people who served, the lives that were lost, the leaders who made the decision, the supporters and detractors, and the impact on the nation. In history, it is not uncommon to play the what-if game. For Vietnam, we do this as well. What if President Wilson welcomed and not denied Vietnamese leader Ho Chi Minh to the peace conference in Versailles in 1919 to support his quest for self-determination? What if Truman had not provided billions of dollars in aid starting in 1946 to secure French imperialism in Southeast Asia? What if Eisenhower demanded democratic elections in Vietnam in 1956 as called for by the Geneva Convention? What if Kennedy had lived and done what Senator Mike Mansfield said, that he was going to withdraw troops after he got reelected in 1964? What if Johnson and Nixon had been more honest with the people of the United States from 1964 to 1975? How would America have changed? The what-if game is not reality. Tonight we hear from those Americans in our community who served our nation when they were called upon and lived a reality. These are the people who will continue to live the experiences of the Vietnam War. While we honor our veterans, we must revisit and we must talk about these lessons. In 2000, historian David Kaiser wrote, with some bold claim, that the war in Vietnam from 1955 to 1975 was the greatest policy miscalculation in the history of American foreign relations. Ultimately, Vietnam was just not a defeat in war. It was a profound failure of judgment, leadership, and understanding that helped shape American foreign policy for the past 50 years. Here are some of the lessons that serve as warnings for future military and political strategies. 1, the United States misunderstood the nature of the conflict. One of the biggest mistakes the United States made was viewing the war as part of the broader Cold War struggle against communism. American policymakers influenced by the domino theory believed that if Vietnam fell to communism, the rest of Southeast Asia would follow. The United States won almost every major battle, yet the war itself was lost. However, the Vietnamese conflict can be seen fundamentally as a national struggle for independence rather than an ideological battle between democracy and communism. While it is true that the North Vietnamese regime was dictatorial, Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese were fighting to remove foreign influence, just as they had done with the French and the Japanese and the Chinese aggression before. The U.S. failed to recognize North Vietnam's primary goal was reunification. 2, the United States overestimated its military power. The Vietnam revealed the limits of American military superiority against a determined and adaptive enemy. The U.S. relied on heavy bombing campaigns that revealed by multiple U.S. administrations as doubting the success, while the public, expecting them to force Vietnam into submission. However, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong used guerrilla tactics, underground tunnel systems, and an extensive supply network to evade and counter American forces. Despite dropping more bombs in Vietnam than in all of World War II, the U.S. failed to achieve decisive victories. This miscalculation showed that technology and firepower superiority could not guarantee success in a war when the enemy relied on unconventional warfare. 3, the United States supported a weak and corrupt South Vietnamese government. The South Vietnamese government, led by leaders of American-backed No Dinh Diem, lacked legitimacy and popular support, making it an unreliable partner. Diem's administration was widely seen as corrupt, repressive, and disconnected from the rural population, particularly the Buddhist majority. His policies, such as persecution of Buddhists and favoritism towards Catholic elites, led to widespread protests, including the famous self-immolation of Buddhist monks in 1963. After Diem's assassination, the South Vietnamese government remained unstable, with frequent coups and leadership changes. This internal weakness made it nearly impossible for South Vietnam to stand on its own. Number 4, the U.S. ignored warnings and internal doubts. Despite early warnings from diplomats and military officials, American leaders continued escalating the war, believing the victory was possible. The Pentagon Papers leaked in 1971 revealed the multiple U.S. administrations privately doubted the war's success while publicly insisting that progress was being made. However, political fears of being seen as weak on communism led to further escalation, deepening the quagmire and increasing American casualties. 5, the United States underestimated domestic opposition to the war. As the war dragged on, opposition within the United States grew stronger, ultimately weakening public and political support. Early on, most Americans believed the government's justification for involvement. But as the war intensified, reports of heavy casualties and atrocities turned public sentiment against the war. The Tet Offensive in 1968, a massive North Vietnamese attack on major South Vietnamese cities, Americans were shocked when it was evident that victory was not near. Protests erupted nationwide with massive demonstrations, draft resistance, and violent clashes. The growing opposition to various progressive groups and soldiers who came back, combined with the media coverage from journalists like Walter Cronkite in 1968, pushed U.S. leaders towards de-escalation. These are but a few of the lessons. While Kaiser's analysis provides a compelling critique of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, it is not without controversy. These historical debates highlight the ongoing complexity of understanding the Vietnam War and its place in U.S. history. So let us honor those who served by ensuring that we apply these lessons to future decision-making. We may never forget the cost of war and the importance of wisdom and leadership. We may never forget the sacrifices that, we should never forget the sacrifices that American men and women made to this nation. If blame is to be made, let it be placed at the feet of the leaders of this nation and not at the soldiers. We are honored to have our veterans with us tonight. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce the co-founder of the Marshall High School Stars and Stripes Club, Ryan Luchetti. He'll be sharing the story of his grandfather, a Lance Corporal in the United States Marine Corps, who served in Vietnam. Ryan.
Thank you all for joining us here today. I wanted to talk about my grandfather. His name was Paul McCarthy, and he was a part of the E Battery, 2nd Battalion, 13th Marine Regiment in the 1st Marine Division. And he served from 1967 until 1968. At the age of 17, he enlisted into the United States Marine Corps, but not before getting a consent form from his mother because he was not yet 18. During the war, he was a wireman, and he played a vital role in ensuring that artillery could provide fire support to the Marines on the ground that depended on key operations, including Operation Prairie and the Tet Offensive. Throughout these campaigns, artillery from the 13th Marine Regiment was essential in suppressing enemy forces and protecting the infantry by delivering precise, long-range firepower, whether to destroy enemy positions, disrupt attacks, or provide counter-battery fire against the enemy. The artillery succeeded in doing so. The success of these operations heavily relied on smooth, uninterrupted communications between artillery units, forward observers, and command centers. This is where my grandfather, as a wireman, came in. His job was to set up, maintain these communication lines, ensuring that artillery could coordinate with infantry and other units effectively. During intense operations like Operation Prairie, and while under heavy fire of the Tet Offensive, he kept the communication lines flowing and was often in dangerous conditions so all artillery units could quickly respond to calls for fire support. The wiremen were the backbone of the communication network, making sure that every artillery round fired hit its mark at the right moment to support the Marines on the ground. In all these operations, the artillery and wiremen worked hand in hand to maintain the precision and effectiveness of fire support. Whether it was maintaining lines under attack or coordinating with multiple units, the role of a wireman like my grandfather ensured that the artillery was always ready to respond, helping keep infantry and fellow Marines safe and be effective in the field. I now have the privilege of introducing Mr. Michael Burke, who is a resident of Marshfield. In 1964, he graduated from Stockbridge School at the University of Bridgewater State and went on a 31-year teaching career at Duxbury High School. Early, he rarely talked about his experiences in Vietnam, but came to be a spokesman for the Huey Welcome Home float. The Huey was synonymous with the Vietnam War, serving in a variety of roles, including troop transport, medical evacuation, cargo transport, and aerosol missions. We are fortunate to have Mr. Burkhoff for a few words.
Thank you, Ryan. I want to begin by saying welcome to my brotherhood, our wives, our spouses, and the widows. I have an interesting story, but I had served in the early years of Vietnam in 1966 to 1967. I was with the 25th Infantry Division, was based in Cu Chi, and that was part of what Steve said in regards to the tunnels. I took part in Operation Cedar Rapids, which was in the Iron Triangle. The reason why you have the poster here is the fact that when I got out in 1967, I did not talk about Vietnam. It wasn't until 2018 I was able to join the Welcome Home float, which was built by Jack Flagg, a Marshfield contractor, and a person who since deceased, and Harry Titus, who is in Kingston, still alive, and walks with us. It is an interesting thing because I didn't talk from 1967 to 2018, and I was glad that I found the Welcome Home float group of Huey guys, because they gave us the inner recognition that we all knew, because we all lived it. And I want to say that Marshfield has been very supportive of welcoming the Welcome Home float during Veterans Day, and I think this will be the last year since, as it was said, and as that poster says, 50 years ago, the treaty was signed to stop all war in Vietnam. So, there's a little plus beside it. I was there 68 years ago, but we won't talk about that. I want to share this, you can hold that. I want to share a book that's very, I guess it's getting scarce, but it was for service duty and sacrifice of the veterans in Massachusetts. It's entitled A Time to Honor. In this, I am giving this book to the Stars and Stripes Club, Ryan and Tim, from the Burke family and the Huey group. You will find your grandfather's expert devotion to Vietnam, and that is to be handled by kid gloves, because I don't think you'll be the only one, as long as Steve is there, to look at it. So thank you for the invitation, and enjoy and listen carefully to what these gentlemen say.
I now have the privilege of introducing Karen Paulette and Lisa Potts, the Director and Assistant Director of Veteran Services in Marshfield. Thank you.
Never mind. Good evening. My name is Karen Paulette. I am a retired Army Master Sergeant, and I'm here tonight with Lisa Potts, representing the Town of Marshfield Veteran Services. We work right here in Town Hall, and we work to serve all our veterans and their families. We extend a big thank you to the Stars and Stripes Club of Marshfield High School for putting together this presentation in honor of our dear friend Ed Sullivan, who is no longer with us. And Ed was a Vietnam vet, and his picture was up here a little bit earlier with all the guys there that did some yard work. So thank you for all you've done for him and his family. We appreciate your community service and everything you've given to our office and our veterans in our town over the past 6 months. We in Veteran Services are here to support our veterans, their families, and all things veteran related to the town. And you may wonder what some of those things are. It could be health care and financial support. It could mean your education because your parents are a veteran and you have education benefits, but you don't know how to go and get those. VA disabilities, helps in time of crisis, help at home, and camaraderie at its best, as you can see. So as Lisa and I always say, our community is the best at taking care of its veterans and their families, and that is because you are always looking out for one another. So please continue to send those people our way. And at this time, I would like to welcome Lisa to introduce our 4 Vietnam veterans.
Thank you all for being here tonight. It's an honor to introduce these 4 gentlemen who are not only veterans here in Marshfield, but close friends of Karen and I. So first, we have Mr. Joe Hanlon, who was born in Boston in 1949 and grew up in Dedham, Massachusetts as one of 9 siblings. Joe was a standout high school athlete, both in football and basketball, attended Bentley College to play basketball, but left in February of 1968 to serve his country and joined the United States Army. In December of 1969, he landed in Vietnam. He worked in the 34th Infantry Platoon, 1st Cavalry Division, Scout Dog. He walked point with his dogs on patrol for detection purposes only. Joe came home from Vietnam with a rank of E6 in October of 1970, married Carol in October of 73. His civilian career was as a firefighter for the Dedham Fire Department. They have 3 kids, 13 grandkids, and his priorities now are God, family, and country. Joe. Was born in Youngstown, Ohio in 1944 and attended Youngstown State University before entering the Navy in his senior year of college. Ed enlisted in the United States Navy in 1966 and shortly after became a naval officer. Ed went to Vietnam in September of 1967 through June of 1968 with the U.S. Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 9, otherwise known as the Seabees. He then returned to Vietnam after a tour in Okinawa, where he became the officer in charge of a 150-man detachment. Ed came home as a lieutenant, and in September of 1970 married Paula. His civilian career was in sales and commercial truck leasing. He has 2 kids that grew up here in Marshfield and 3 grandchildren. Mr. Raymond Jadewski was born in Warren, Massachusetts in 1943 while attending UMass Amherst. He was drafted. Ray served in the United States Army for 24 years in Germany, Belgium, Vietnam, and stateside here in the U.S. He was a platoon leader and intel officer in Germany, building and grounds officer in Belgium, intel officer, company commander, and assistant operations officer in Vietnam, and company commander and logistics officer in the reserves. Ray retired from the Army as a major after 24 years of service. He is married to Elaine, and they have 1 son and a granddog named Maisie. Mr. Michael Atchison grew up in White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and graduated from chef's, did I say that right? He stood up. And he graduated from chef school in St. Paul. He has a family history in the service and felt it was his duty to serve. Mike enlisted in the United States Army in 1970. In Vietnam, Mike worked in supply, mortar squad, and patrol. He was then security police, tasked with frisking every single person that came into Play Coup's main gate. He left Vietnam in 1972 and continued to serve our country, being stationed in West Germany and multiple stateside bases. Mike retired from the Army after 23 years as a Chief Warrant Officer 3. Mike, who is married to Jane, has a son, Michael Jr., and a granddaughter, Olive.
We will now transition to the interview portion of tonight's program. And the first question that I would like to ask is, can you share a bit about your background before the war and what led you to enlist or to be drafted?
Microphone. Can you hear me?
Is it on?
You're gonna go first to me.
You guys think it's easy.
We do get along. As it was told, I was a senior at Youngstown State University, and I was a member of Theta Chi fraternity. Just give you a little background of what I was up to before I did enlist, but I was walking through the main building in the spring semester, and it was early April, and there was a Naval Reserve officer sitting at the table, recruiter, and we talked, and I had always wanted to join the Navy. So he got my attention, said, if you pass this test and the physical, you can become a naval officer. I passed the test, passed the physical, and enlisted in May of '66. I wasn't due to graduate until later that year, August, as a matter of fact, so I had a delayed departure. And sometime in, I believe it was September or October, I reported for duty. And that's it.
I'm a country boy. The town I came from was about a population of 3,100. The population now is 3,500. It grew when I left. I went to the University of Massachusetts after going to St. John's Prep up in Danvers for 3 years, which was obviously a Catholic school run by the Xavier Brothers, and it was just boys, no girls. So that was rough. When I got out of there, I got accepted to Boston College, and at that time, BC was the same thing. Boys, more boys, and more boys. And I also applied to UMass Amherst. And guess what? I got accepted. So I went there. Not for long. 1 semester did me in. I fell in love with every girl I saw. After that, I said, well, I guess college isn't for me. So I learned a trade. I was a machinist working for the Hamilton Standard Corporation out of Hartford. And there I also met my wife and I got married. Or before I got married, the president at that time, Lyndon Baines Johnson, said, hey, if anybody's over 24 years old and married, will not be drafted. 2 days after that speech, guess what? I got that notice. You are hereby drafted. I did everything in the world except go to Canada to try and get out of it. I tried to get in the reserves, no dice, they were full. So I went. And I went to basic training at Dix. From there I went down to Fort Eustis, better known as Fort Useless, in Virginia to be a marine engineer. Marine engineer at that time meant you were a grease monkey. Okay? You weren't learning engineering, you were learning how to take apart engines. And while I was stationed there, looking around, seeing how everybody's doing, the enlisted, the NCOs and the officers. Well, I kind of liked the way the officers had it made and shaped, as far as I was concerned. So I applied for OCS. And I wanted to go to transportation school. Well, I didn't make transportation school. The colonel that gave me the good news said, you got 3 choices. All are combat arms. That's okay, fine. Said, you got the infantry. Where's that? Fort Benning, Georgia. Well, it's a heck of a long way from Warren, Mass. So I said, nah, I'll pass on that one. Where's the other one? I think he said field artillery. Where's that? Oklahoma. Whoa, that's even further. Forget it. I'm not going. And he finally said, Corps of Engineers. And I said, where is that? At Fort Belvoir, Virginia. Okay, fine, I'm in Virginia now anyway, but where is Fort Belvoir? Just outside of D.C. That's only a 6-hour ride home. I'll take it. So I went to OCX. From OCX, I did take the bio. I did the different countries and Vietnam. Who's next? Joe, you're next.
Yes, I graduated high school in '67. My life is sports. I did enough academically to have eligibility to play. All I cared about was C's, so I could play sports. But after graduation, my coach got me into Bentley College to play basketball. And I loved it, but couldn't keep up with the academics. And I knew I wouldn't last, so I dropped out in February of 1968. And at that time, everyone signed up with the Selective Service and was eligible for the draft, and you had to have extreme excuse to get out. So I kind of rolled with the tide. I looked at life at that point and said, you know, what's my future? I'm not going to college. I'm not, you know, no real skills, so I'll just flow with the tide. And instead of waiting for the draft, I enlisted with a friend of mine on a buddy system, they called it, 2-year enlistment. Entered the Army in December of 1968. What did I think at that point about Vietnam? I was brought up in grammar school, hiding under the desk on drills for the nuclear bombs. You know, the fear of communism spreading throughout the world, and I guess being young and naive, believing it, but I'm no longer young and naive, and I still believe it, and the evil of communism. But that's another story. I guess I should say that if you detected in my voice, I do feel a little agitated. I have my, Lisa mentioned, I have a beautiful wife and 3 kids and 13 grandchildren. Most of them are here sitting, listening to things that I'll say that they've never heard before, because I don't enjoy talking about it. It agitates my inner being. 50, how many years ago? 53, 55, whatever, years ago, and talks, comments, names that I hear that are long dead agitate me to my inner core. I apologize for that, but it's the truth. Don't get me wrong, I'm not bitter and angry. Just as things like this happen, or little individual talks, as we gather on Tuesdays down the hop for lunch, we, for the most part, stay away from war talk, stay away from all of that stuff. We laugh and we joke and we have fun, it's good, but we're a bunch of guys that went through the same thing. I compare this, and don't get offended, but I love sports, and I hear people sitting in stands talking about this coach and that player, and they should do this and they should do that, and I hear they never played before. You know, they can have their opinion and their knowledge and their so-called wisdom, but they never played. They don't know really what it's like. I say the same thing about war. War changes you forever, kids. It's a thing to be avoided. Love thy neighbor as thyself. be at peace with all men as far as it concerned you. But unfortunately, there are those in the world who don't want peace with you. Therefore, another analogy, if I live on a street and I want a nice, peaceful, quiet street, but if some hoods, some punks, some wise guys come down the street and start harassing me in my house, I will do something about it. And I don't think it's bad at all. Whatever I need to do to protect me and my family and things. But more than that, if they bypass my house and go down to a neighbor's house down the street, an older woman, a young couple who can't defend themselves, I will go down and help them. That's what I believe Vietnam was. And all the politics, all the history written about it, great. You can do your analogies. I have my analogy of the Vietnam War. It was a noble effort to begin with. But if I had my choice, I would outlaw all politics when it concerns any confrontation, any warfare at all. And then it will be done right. Thank you.
I really don't need this thing, but, you know, following Joe, those are some big shoes to fill. It's like following Robin Williams on the stage, you know. I'm Mike Atchison. I grew up in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. And when I got to high school, I wasn't an athlete, but I still got C's, Joe. And so after high school, I went to chef school, and I graduated from that and became a chef and worked for a while. But then they came out with this thing called the lottery. And I looked at my lottery number, and it was like double digits. And I thought, oh, my brother's was number 365, and mine was number 19 or something. So I said, okay, I better enlist because they're going to draft me anyway. So I ended up enlisting in 1970 and went to the Army. And of course, the recruiter said, oh, well, you've been to chef school, you won't have to go to cook school. I said, okay. So the first place they sent me to cook school. So anyway, but make a long story short, I spent another year or so, and then off to Vietnam I went, and I was in the first Signal Brigade, and we were up on top of a little mountain called Bung Chua Mountain, which was by Quy Nhon, and you know, you have an MOS, but like the Army says, we're going to teach you this MOS and send you to school, but that doesn't mean you're going to work in it. So I ended up working in the mortar squad and doing patrols and working in supply. I think I cooked maybe one meal the whole time I was over there, and I was a cook. So, but we had Papa Sons that did a lot of the cooking, so that was good. And they were great. Then our units stood down because at that time of the war, we were starting to stand a lot of units down and send guys home. So I got sent to Pleiku, where I was a security police. You had to check all the vehicles coming in, all the containers, frisk all the civilians. Same thing going out, because they would steal you blind if you didn't. And there was a lot of good times, and there was a lot of bad times. And like Joe says, you know, war changes you. You just never go back. And but my father was in World War II. All his brothers were in the military. My mom, all her brothers were in the Marine Corps, so I thought I would go in the Marine Corps. But the problem was, when I went down to the recruiting office with my buddy Randy, we were both kind of half in the bag, and we got down there, and I never made it to the Marine Corps. I ended up with the Army guy. He ended up in the Navy, so. Anyway, I wouldn't trade it for anything. But I just thought it was my duty to go, and serve in the military. There's a lot of camaraderie there, and there's friends you meet, and you'll never ever forget.
Do I have the only one that works?
I think so.
What?
I don't have one that works, right? That's like the past one.
We got one that works.
Okay.
I don't want it.
I got
The next question is, what was a typical day like for you during your service, and how did you maintain morale?
Okay, I want to go straight now. Okay.
I was with the infantry. I wasn't a pure grunt. I was a grunt with a dog. I handled a scout dog, a German Shepherd dog that, for the purpose of walking point and detecting enemy supply, anything that didn't belong in the jungle, the dog would pick up and would be, there's nothing better than pre-warning in warfare. Know what's coming against you. But that was the difference between a grunt and what I did. Was a grunt was in the field for sometimes 30, 60, 90 straight days, just humping in the jungle and the rice paddies and just awful duty. But by the grace of God, I get into scout dogs, which I did the same, but because of the dog, they'd send a chopper out for me and the dog to go back in. They wouldn't let the dog stay out there longer than 5 days. So I was in and out of the field. And so I dealt with, what was in the field, that part of it, but not on a continuous basis. Back in the rear area, we did chores, what was necessary, cleaning and all that, taking care of the dogs, shots, exercise, cleaning up, all of that. But it was very monotonous, day after day, just waiting, and then the next time out, you wait, and you get called, and a chopper comes in and takes you and the dog out to the jungle, to that part of it. But it's a strain, I think, in hindsight, a tremendous strain on the minds of young kids. We're all young kids, that's all we were, just a little bit older than you guys. I delayed a little bit going in, so I was 19 when I went in. I was out of the Army, out of Vietnam at 21 years old. It's just, you, like anybody, you find what you can do and not do, and you do it. You laugh, you joke, you cry, you fight. We had everything you can think of amongst ourselves. But when you got in the thick of it, in the worst part of it, there was no differences, there was no problems, and I'm talking racially, age. I mean, I was young. There were guys that got drafted immediately upon graduation from college, and they were like old men to me. But they did the same thing as we did, and some of them left families, wives and kids, and we all knew what we were in, and the more we were there, we learned more, and I would say it was pressure, building at a slow pace, but steadily, and the closer you got to your freedom bird, we used to call them, wait for our freedom bird to go back to the world, because that wasn't the world over there. It was something different, but you just kind of hung on and did the best with each other, day after day after day.
Joe had one of the most dangerous jobs over there. A point man had a life expectancy actually of about 7 days out of 365. So I commend Joe for his service and
explain the Seabees. 1,000 men working in a construction battalion. So it was like we went to work on different job sites, different things to do. As an officer, I had many jobs throughout my 3 years with the Seabees, but there wasn't a typical day. And Joe struck on a nerve that has, I think, affected all of us, and that is, I was there in 1968, January 30th of 1968, and I quote from my cruise book here what happened on that night. Rockets struck near our hillside bunkers in the early morning hours. Rockets passing over the camp impacted on the Da Nang Air Base, signaling the beginning of a massive Viet Cong Tet offensive directed against urban areas throughout entire South Vietnam. It was the start of the '68 Tet offensive, and it lasted for 12 days. That was a huge change, as the gentleman said during his explanation of the Vietnam War. But what I think my point is that once those experiences happen to any of us, you were on alert 24/7 for as long as you were there. And unlike the Army, we were on a rotation. The Seabees were on a rotation of 9 months. So we'd go for 9 months, come home, train, pick up more men, and then we were eligible to go back. So my first tour was 10 months, and then I went back for another tour, which we'll get into with another question of what I did. But my point is that that tension never left you, and you live with it pretty much all your life.
My first 7 days in Vietnam were like spring break. I landed at Cam Ranh Bay, which was a beautiful beach. And I said, I'm going to like this. 7 days later, I was in the heat of it. That 7 days ended very quickly. And from that point, it was a 24-hour day, 7 days a week. Actually, I'm sorry, 6.5. They gave us a half a day's off with the good Lord. Also, the ones that had, I was an officer, so I had it sort of made. But I felt sorry for the enlisted engineers. They worked their buns off all day long, came in, ate supper, had a shower, and went on guard duty. There were 2 to a post. How they divided up the time was between them. That was the only sleep they got. And again, I think, the enlisted men were the backbone. And behind every good officer were NCOs that taught them, and behind the NCOs were the men that did the work.
I was one of those enlisted guys.
You're welcome.
A typical day for me, there was no day that was really typical, but you were always up early, or you were up earlier if there was a mortar attack, because there were always mortar attacks, because they figured out that was how they got you up into a bunker so you didn't get to sleep. So, there was a lot of harassment like that, but then there were always lots of chores to do, like filling sandbags, which was very monotonous, but somebody had to do it. So us enlisted guys got to do it, especially if you were a Spec 4.
Thank you.
Anyway, so there was a lot of stuff like that, or cutting charges off mortars for the mortar squad, or going outside the wire on patrols, because at our mountain, they had sensors around the mountain. They had magnetic sensors, they had microphone sensors, and they had, I can't remember what they call them anymore, but, so, yeah. So if there was a motion sensor set off, well, that could be an animal, could be a person. So let's call the mortar squad, fire some mortars. If it was magnetic sensor, you definitely knew it wasn't an animal. Call the mortar squad, let's fire some mortars. And so, and if it was a microphone, and you hear things grunting, well, you knew it was an animal. But if you hear people talking, let's call the mortar squad. Of course, then the next day, people had to go out on patrol and replace batteries in these sensors that were destroyed or needed batteries replaced, so we did a lot of that. We got to eat a lot of sea rations, and every once in a while we got to play a little basketball or listen to music. We had one 8-track player, we had 3 tapes. Johnny Cash, Nancy Wilson, and I think it was O.C. Smith, God Didn't Make Little Green Apples. So that was the only 3 tapes we had the whole year. So anyway, so I guess you could say it was kind of boring, but anyway, that's about all I got to say about that.
So, how did you build camaraderie and trust with your fellow soldiers during your time in Vietnam?
Well, I don't have much to say about that except just working with other guys and women, and we didn't have too many women in our outfit. In fact, we had none, but there were a lot of women that served over there. Mostly like listening to music, playing basketball, or filling sandbags. Whatever you were doing with your fellow soldiers, and that's what built camaraderie.
As company commander, which lasted 6 months, that's the way the Army did it in combat. You'd have 6 months command time, 6 months staff time. As a commander, you didn't have the choice of building up camaraderie with your troops. Okay? That was a no-no. I mean, it was strictly officer enlisted. And now I understand why. Because if you got friendly with your enlisted, and they should happen to get seriously injured or killed in action, okay, even though the government already notified your next of kin, you're obliged to write a letter of condolences to the parents. And that was the hardest thing that a commander had to do. So you didn't have that opportunity. Once you got on the staff, you didn't have that responsibility. You loosened up and you started getting friendly with your troops.
I think the way it happened for me was as a boot ensign going into MCD 9, I reported for duty, and it was a couple months prior to my first deployment to Vietnam, and got thrown into the job. And the first job I had was Special Services Officer, which every boot ensign, unfortunately, had to do his time in that job. And that job consisted of sports, movies, liquor for all the clubs, really hard work. You know? But the Seabees had a motto, or they still do have a motto, and that motto is can do. And when I reported for duty, that motto was really in full blast, because we were all getting ready to go to Vietnam. And the camaraderie that if everyone did their job, and by doing your job, you all kind of got together and to complete the job and get ready to go. And that camaraderie, or that work ethic, pretty much continued throughout my deployment and really my entire time with the Seabees.
I fell into it. I no background in my family or anything, but a friend who had been in Vietnam was a firefighter, and I took the test, and my name came up, my number, and I was debating on whether to take it. And he called me up and he said, some choice words, but I'll clean it up. You're an idiot if you don't take this job. So I took it, and I found out what he meant when I took it. I loved to go into burning buildings. I loved, it was pitch black, it was totally involved with smoke, fire, heat, with masks on, you can't see. I loved it, loved it, loved it. And then coming out of it, what did we do? We got together and we sat around and we talked about what we had been through, and the camaraderie that we had couldn't be matched by anything. Close in teams and sports, close, but not close really. That's what I had in Vietnam. Difficult situations, going through them, when your life is at stake, when you really believe I could die, and you come through it, you look at the people you're with, and you'll never forget them. 2 weeks ago, I got a call from Mac and Swanee, two guys I was with. They were in a car driving around the bayous of Louisiana, and they were laughing and joking, visiting Fort Polk, visiting, historic sites, and they were laughing, and Mac has been sick, Parkinson's, from Agent Orange. And it was so good to hear his voice. And I wanted to be with them, but I was with them on the phone and laughing and talking. That's the camaraderie that difficult situations will give to you if you give up yourself in them. And that's what we did. We did things together for each other's back. And you can't get any closer than that. Thank you.
The next question is, did you have any mentors or figures who impacted your perspective on the war or life in general?
I thought about this question, and to be honest with you, no individual about, I want to be like him. I looked at people to find out what they knew and how seasoned they were when I first got there. You're scared to death, but you hide it, you hold it in, the pressure, the anxiety. So you're looking for help. So I looked for guys that had been there longer than me, especially guys that were almost heading home, with one caveat. They were way too careful. They were, you were called a short timer. When you got in under a month and you counted down the days, you'd say, how many days do you have? Well, I got 29 days and a wake up. I got 28 days and a wake up. Just counting the days when you'd go home. But when you first got there, you looked for anybody who you thought knew what they were doing. And because you get there and you think it's going to be all combat, it's going to be constant, and I got to grab onto somebody to protect me, to show me what to do. You have all this training, but am I gonna be able to do it in the midst of life and death? And when you watch, you see guys, and you see the things that they've overcome, and the quiet confidence and a surety that they've developed. You have to. You can't stay in a constant state of anxiety and fear. You have to beat it somehow. And that's when you get together and you know you have guys watching your back and you watch their back. And that's what developed the camaraderie.
It's tough to follow this guy. But what he's telling you is true. I didn't have any mentors per se, but when it didn't take long once I got to the battalion to know who to make friends with and who knew what was going on. It was the chief petty officers, the enlisted men, E7 and above, that knew. It spent maybe 10, 15 years getting to that position, that knew what was going on. And so you would refer to them, especially as a young officer that knew little or nothing when you first got there, that if you made friends with one of these petty officers, or the chief petty officers, then you made a good friend and someone that would give you the right information, and so you didn't look like an idiot all the time. So, but that perspective of the war and life in general, I think we all came home different. I know when I came home, it was November, and I came home, spent the holidays, and I packed everything I owned in a U-Haul trailer and came to Boston. I guess the freedom I had and the ability to do what I wanted to do and had no orders from anyone kind of gave me a good perspective on life, and came to Boston. And it didn't take me long. I met my wife, and that's the rest of the story is told. But I think overall that yeah, there were many men in the battalion that I looked up to because of their experiences, and I learned from them.
I can remember one of my mentors, Sergeant First Class Neely. He was my platoon sergeant as a brand new second lieutenant mate in Germany. I walked into the office and we introduced each other, and he says, "Lieutenant, sit down and listen." "Yes, Sergeant." I'm saying to myself, who is he to tell me what to do? But I'm glad I listened. I did. He told me this one thing. He says, "I am going to take you under my wing for 1 year. If I tell you to say yes, you say yes. If I tell you to say no, you say no." "Yes, Sergeant." And that went on for about 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, I felt my Cheerios, okay? I knew it all at this point in time. I could build a bridge, I could do this, I could do that. Well, guess what? I screwed up on one of our training missions. I came back to the office, my head hung down low, and he let me have it. And I'll never forget it. And the one thing I got out of that was listen to your NCOs as an officer. Don't think you know more than they do, because you don't. Sergeant Neely had already had 18 years in. I've only had 3. So you can see that, you know, that paid off for me. Because from that point on, I listened to whoever had any advice to give me, whether I took it or not, that was my prerogative. Okay? And the other thing is, with a lot of officers that I've known, especially in the Army, led from the rear. I would never ask my soldiers to do anything anything that I would not do first.
As far as mentors, I guess my first mentors were my Boy Scout leaders. Those of you that have been in scouting know, Boy Scout leaders, they can impact your life a great deal. Back when I was going to Boy Scouts, things were probably a little different. You know, you showed up, said the Pledge of Allegiance, then you did push-ups and other physical training, then you did marching, and then you got around to doing tasks like scaling walls and making fire out of flint and steel and all that kind of good stuff. Anyway, we had a great time, and I'll never forget my scout leaders. My father, of course, was in the Army, and I remember one thing he said to me when I left for basic training. He said, "Son, the Army's going to make a man out of you." And he was right. And my Uncle Tom, who served in the Marine Corps during World War II and the Korean War, retired just before they were going to send him to Vietnam. We had a lot of stories. He told me a lot of stories, and he was a big mentor of mine. Another one was when I was a kid growing up in Minnesota, whenever it snowed, I used to go down and shovel this older guy's driveway. You know, he'd give me a couple bucks, and that was cool. And I knew he was involved in hockey, but I didn't really know what, until later on after I came back from Vietnam. I found out that he was coaching Philadelphia Flyers, and he won 2 Stanley Cups. His name was Fred Sherrill. But he kind of motivated me, because when I was in high school, I mean, I got C's. I wasn't in sports. Athletics, I sucked. Anyway, I didn't do anything athletic till I was probably 30 years old, and then I started running and doing marathons and stuff like that. But I coached youth hockey for 2 years in Wisconsin, 22 in Needham youth hockey, coached baseball many years. I just loved working with kids, and that was due a lot to Fred Sherrill.
So we're coming into an end here. So I'd like to ask you if there are any questions that we have not mentioned this evening that you'd like to answer.
Yeah, it's up to you guys. If you want, was there anything else that you wanted to add? I would just like to add one thing, and that is, we talked about some tough times here, and as Joe said, war is not a good thing. But I'd like to just talk about one job I had with the Seabees, and that was the Civic Action Officer. That was probably the most gratifying job I had during my entire 3 years with the Navy. And that was because we were a construction battalion, we had the available construction material. And well, during my time as Civic Action Officer, we helped the Buddhist monks build a dormitory and classroom at the Baudet School and Orphanage on the outskirts of Da Nang. And there were 800 orphans there. And every time I go there, it was a joy. My mother sent me a sand bucket full of lollipops, and I took those there one afternoon. I was standing on the back of a truck throwing lollipops to 800 orphans. So it was just a gratifying time, and I actually have a letter written to us from the Buddhist monk thanking us for our devotion to helping them in the orphans.
One thing I have to add is, you know, our country, our great country only survives because generation after generation of young men and women decide to serve. And as you graduate from high school, you have to... Always getting the hook out. As you graduate from high school, you have to start the next phase of your life. And it can be either going on to school like college, it can be learning a trade and getting, you know, your training OJT or on-the-job training. It can be just taking any old job, hanging out on the street corner, or you can decide to join the military. And when you you join the military, you know, there's a lot of camaraderie, you learn a trade, you can earn money for schooling for the future, and you'll probably serve some places where you don't really like to serve, and maybe your life's on the line, but you'll serve there. And the one thing to remember is, even in training, it's very dangerous. You read every day where there's a jet plane goes down, or a helicopter crashes, or a Navy ship, there's a fire, or a tank explodes. Guys die in training, and men and women do too all the time. But the camaraderie you build lasts forever.
I think the moment that I remember the most in the 365 days over there is when I came home. We flew, I don't know what kind of an aircraft it was, but it was loaded with military, obviously. And we landed at SeaTac in Seattle, Washington. And I had already purchased the ticket to fly from Seattle to Hartford, Connecticut. I lived in Springfield at the time with my wife and 18-month-old son. And I go up to, you know, get my ticket, and that is, we don't have anything for you. Oh, okay, fine. Shrugged it off and said, we'll put you on the wait list. Fine. My name gets called. I board the aircraft, I get my seat. I'm sitting there, and people are still coming on board, and then I'm told, the stewardess comes up and says, I'm sorry, sir, but the person that has this seat has just come on board. You'll have to get off. Well, my heart went from here to you know where, all the way down to my toes. Oh my God, you know, I'm so happy that I was going home. And the guy saw me, I was in uniform, and he said he asked me, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Chicago, to Hartford. And he said, well, I'm going there too. And he told the stewardesses, he said, the captain's got my seat all the way. I don't know who the gentleman was. I'm not even sure if he's still alive, but I thank him dearly.
One of the greatest moments of my life was getting on what we call the Freedom Bird in Benoit. And it was surreal. Are we really going home? There were 200 of us, and I thought the plane would erupt as soon as we get off the surface. It didn't. I was shocked. I looked around and I think everybody was shocked as I was, that it's real, we're going home. War is war. My grandkids, any of you ask me, should I join the military? No, don't go near the military. But if you feel, if anyone here, a young person feels, I want to go in, I want to get a career, I want to do this, absolutely, you can do that. You can have success in the military, but always know that there could be war. There could be times that I will have to enter into that I have no control over, and you have no idea what way it's going to go. It changes your life, but I tell you, one of the main things that it did is taught me what it's like to deny self, to forget self. You can't think of self in the middle of combat, in the middle of warfare, in mortars coming into your area. You can't think of yourself. You look around and you grab your friend. What do we do? Where are we going? What should we do next? It develops that ability to get out of yourself and commit yourself to others. And I think that's the greatest lesson I've ever learned in my life, is life is live it for others, and you will most out of life that you could ever imagine. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to start off by giving a big thank you to our custodians for all the hard work they do behind the scenes. Their dedication does not go unnoticed, and we truly appreciate it. Next, I'd like to thank Mr. Grellen, the advisor of the Stars and Stripes Club, for all that he contributes. Another thank you to Mr. Weisgerber for helping organize the event and making sure everything runs smoothly. Big thank you to Lisa Potts and Karen Paulette for their ongoing support and everything they do to help us serve our Marshfield veterans. As many of you know, last year myself and Ryan Luchetti started the Stars and Stripes Club. The purpose of our club is to give back to veterans in our community through acts of service. No matter what we do, we can never truly repay the sacrifices these men and women have made for our country and for the freedoms we enjoy. What is a veteran, you may ask? A veteran, whether active duty, discharge, retired, or reserves, is someone who, at one point in their life, wrote a blank check made payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including their life. That's the kind of sacrifice we're here tonight to honor. So far, our club has mostly focused on fall cleanups and lawn care for veterans. I want to personally thank everyone that has helped out in the club. Every little bit makes a huge difference, and we're incredibly grateful for your support. Before I finish, I'd like to remind everyone there's a snack shack set up out front with all proceeds going directly to the Stars and Stripes Club of MHS. We also have a Venmo account for anyone who would like to donate. Your contributions help us serve our veterans. Thank you all for coming today, for your continued support, and for helping us honor these 4 Vietnam veterans with all those who have served. We truly appreciate it. And one more thing, I'd like to wish a happy birthday to Ray.
Is turning young 82 and
28.
I was wondering, will you all join us in singing a happy birthday to him? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ray. Happy birthday to you.
And can we get one more round of applause for the 4 veterans?